In the summer of 1944, Warsaw was a city waiting to breathe again. For 5 long years it had lived under the shadow of occupation, the Nazi flag over the city hall, the sound of boots in the streets, the silence of fear in every home. But beneath that silence, something was moving, something that refused to die. The Polish underground, the Armia Krajowa, the Home Army, had been preparing for this moment for years. In basements and attics, men and women built weapons out of scraps, printed secret newspapers, and passed coded messages through bakeries and churches. They had one goal: to rise when the time came and take back their city. Life under German occupation was not life, it was survival. Every street had its ghosts. Public executions were daily reminders of what resistance meant. Entire families vanished overnight. The Jewish ghetto had been destroyed the year before. Its ashes still clung to the air. Yet even after all that, Warsaw didn't break. A teacher who ran secret lessons in her apartment later said, "We taught the children history, not the history that was allowed, but the one that kept us alive." In every home, people whispered the same words: soon. By July 1944, the Red Army was approaching the eastern bank of the Vistula River. For the people of Warsaw, it felt like a miracle. The occupiers were retreating, the Allies were advancing, and liberation seemed only days away. But they didn't know the full truth. They didn't know that politics was already writing their fate. They didn't know that help might not come. Still, the city could not wait any longer. 5 years of humiliation and terror had turned into a single burning desire: to fight. "Better to die standing than live on our knees," one young fighter wrote in his diary. On July 31st, the order came. Tomorrow, they would rise. They were not soldiers. Most had never held a real rifle. They were students, bakers, postmen, nurses. They wore armbands with the Polish flag sewn by hand. Their weapons were stolen or handmade. A few grenades, old pistols, bottles filled with fuel. But what they lacked in weapons, they carried in spirit. They believed that if they took the city, the Allies would help. They believed that freedom was not given, it was taken. In the night before the uprising, church bells rang softly through the ruins. People embraced in the streets, some laughing, others crying. No one slept. At 5:01 p.m. on August the 1st, 1944, the first shots were fired. The uprising had begun. Flags appeared from windows, red and white against the gray sky. Crowds sang the national anthem in open defiance. For the first time in 5 years, Warsaw was alive again, alive and on fire. A girl who joined as a medic later said, "We knew we might not live to see tomorrow, but for that one day we were free." August the 1st, 1944. The clock struck 5 in the evening, W hour, the hour of freedom. Across Warsaw, thousands of men and women rose from the shadows. They ran into the streets with homemade rifles, grenades, and armbands of red and white. For the first time since 1939, the Polish flag flew openly in their own capital. The city erupted in chaos. But it was the chaos of hope. At first, no one believed it was real. Civilians poured out of buildings to see what was happening. They saw young boys in uniforms made from old jackets, girls carrying first aid kits instead of weapons. And everywhere, the red and white flag, painted on walls, hung from windows, waving in the wind. The sound of gunfire echoed across the city, mixed with laughter and singing. People shouted, "Poland lives! Warsaw is ours again!" In those first hours, the impossible felt possible. German patrols were driven back, weapons were captured, prisoners freed. Barricades appeared overnight, built from trams, sandbags, furniture, anything people could find. The Home Army, Armia Krajowa, numbered about 40,000 men and women. Most had little more than courage and homemade explosives, but they had what the Germans no longer did: belief. Children served as couriers, running through alleys under fire to deliver messages. Women turned cellars into hospitals. Priests blessed fighters in the streets as shells fell nearby. A young nurse wrote in her diary, "We were not afraid. We were alive. For the first time, we were fighting for something that was ours." In the first days, the insurgents captured police stations, supply depots, even parts of the city center. German units, caught off guard, retreated in confusion. For a brief moment, it looked like the uprising might succeed. On August 2nd, Polish fighters raised the national flag over the Prudential Building, one of the tallest in Warsaw. The people cheered as they saw it waving against the smoke. It was more than cloth. It was a promise. In cafes, people whispered prayers. Children drew eagles on walls with chalk. A city that had been silent for years now sang. It felt like a dream, one survivor remembered. We forgot hunger, fear, death. We only knew we were free. But freedom came at a price. By the second night, German reinforcements were arriving. Tanks rolled in from the west, artillery from the north. Airplanes circled above like vultures. Still, the Poles held their ground. Every street became a fortress, every rooftop a battlefield. In one neighborhood, a dozen young fighters stopped an entire German column. They fought for hours, then vanished into the sewers before tanks could crush them. They had no illusions. They couldn't win a conventional war, but they believed the Allies, or at least the Soviets across the river, would come. Every night they looked east, waiting for the sound of guns that would never arrive. For nearly 2 weeks, Warsaw lived like no city in Europe had since the war began. Free, defiant, alive. Even as bombs fell, people held weddings, played violins in the ruins, wrote newspapers by candlelight. It was madness, and it was beautiful. A poet fighting in the uprising wrote, "If we must die, let it be in the light, not in silence." By mid-August, the dream began to crack. German reinforcements had arrived. Armored divisions, SS units, heavy artillery, and bombers. For Hitler, Warsaw wasn't just a rebellion, it was an insult. He gave a single order: destroy the city, kill them all. It was no longer a war, it was extermination. On August 5th, the Luftwaffe returned. Bombs fell day and night, flattening entire districts. Flames devoured the wooden houses, the markets, the churches where civilians had sought shelter. The air grew thick with smoke and ash. By nightfall, the glow of fire could be seen for miles. German artillery fired without pause. Each shell tore another hole in the city's heart. Whole streets disappeared in seconds. Hospitals, schools, even churches were targeted deliberately. "They weren't fighting us," a Polish fighter wrote. "They were erasing us." The worst came in the Wola district. When SS and police units entered, they didn't take prisoners. They shot anyone they found: men, women, children, the wounded, even doctors in white coats. For 2 days, Wola burned. Tens of thousands were murdered in their homes, in basements, in hospitals. Flames rose so high they lit the sky above the whole city. A survivor recalled, "The streets were full of bodies. We stopped counting. We just tried to stay alive." The uprising had begun with flags and songs. Now it was blood and smoke. The fighters refused to give up. Even as the city collapsed, They fought from rubble to rubble, snipers hiding in chimneys, machine guns in basements, grenades thrown from broken windows. Children carried ammunition through the sewers, guided by candlelight. They called them the sewer soldiers. For many, those tunnels became the last escape and the last grave. A Soviet pilot who flew overhead later wrote, "We saw the fires, we saw the city dying, and we could do nothing." Every day the sky grew darker. Every night the flames grew brighter. The Germans used flamethrowers and explosives to clear entire neighborhoods. If they couldn't take a building, they destroyed it. By the third week, Warsaw looked like a volcano, burning, collapsing, screaming. But even then, the people refused to surrender. Priests gave communion in cellars filled with smoke. Doctors operated with candlelight and kitchen knives. Mothers whispered lullabies to children who would never wake again. "We were fighting," one survivor said, "not to win, but so the world would know we lived." By late August, the insurgents were running out of food, ammunition, and hope. Radio messages begged for help. "We need weapons, medicine, anything." But no one came. The Allies couldn't reach them. The Soviets, standing just across the Vistula River, didn't move. They watched as Warsaw burned. The people looked east every night, waiting for the sound of tanks, the sight of help. It never came. When the fires stopped, there was no city left, only ruins, smoke, and shadows. But beneath those ruins, resistance still breathed. Men and women still carried rifles, still whispered orders, still believed that somehow their fight meant something. "If we die here," one fighter wrote, "then at least we die as free Poles." And with that, the city that was supposed to die kept fighting. When the city above became a graveyard, life moved underground. The basements, tunnels, and sewers became the veins of a dying city, dark, wet, and full of whispers. There was no sunlight, no air, no safety, only survival. The civilians, the ones who hadn't fled, who couldn't, became soldiers in their own way. Doctors, nurses, cooks, messengers, teachers, each of them holding the city together by will alone. Beneath the ruins of schools and theaters, makeshift hospitals were built. Beds were made from doors and blankets, scalpels from kitchen knives. There was no anesthesia, no electricity. Surgeons worked by candlelight, their hands shaking not from fear, but from exhaustion. They fought for every heartbeat. A nurse recalled, "We didn't have medicine, we only had hope. And when that ran out, we lied. We told them they would live." The smell of blood and smoke filled the tunnels. Every hour new wounded arrived. Soldiers, children, mothers, even priests. They came crawling, carried, or dragged. And when they couldn't be saved, the nurses simply closed their eyes and moved on to the next. The youngest became the bravest. Boys of 10 and 11 carried messages through enemy lines, through sewers filled with water and fire. They were small enough to move unseen, fast enough to survive where adults couldn't. They were called the liaison boys. Most of them never saw their next birthday. One, nicknamed Lolek, delivered orders until the last day of the uprising. When asked why, he said, "Because someone has to." Their courage became legend, not because they lived, but because they refused to be afraid. Women were everywhere, at barricades, in hospitals, in the command posts. They cooked, carried ammunition, wrote last letters for the dying. Many took up weapons when the men fell. They wore armbands and courage like armor. Some were medics, others snipers, couriers, or simply mothers refusing to abandon their children. A Soviet journalist later wrote, "The women of Warsaw fought like soldiers and suffered like saints. Even in the ruins, they washed faces, bandaged wounds, whispered lullabies, sang hymns. They refused to let the war erase what it meant to be human. In the middle of all the destruction, life tried to continue. Couples were married in bombed-out churches, rings made from bullet casings. Priests whispered blessings over the roar of artillery. Some said, 'If we are to die, let us die as husband and wife.'" A young bride later recalled, "We had no flowers, no music, no guests, only smoke and love." It was defiance in its purest form, a final act of humanity in a world trying to destroy it. The fighters wrote constantly, letters, diaries, scraps of paper hidden in walls and bottles. They knew they might not survive, but they wanted someone to know, to remember. "We are not heroes," one letter said. "We are people who refuse to forget who we are." After the war, many of those letters were found buried in the ruins, burned, torn, faded, but still legible. Proof that even when a city dies, its voice can survive. By September, there was almost nothing left. No food, no water, no hope. But still, the civilians endured. Children played in the rubble. Women prayed over empty cradles. Doctors kept working, even when their hands stopped trembling and simply shook from hunger. They had nothing left to lose. And somehow, that made them unstoppable. "We lived in the dark," one survivor said. "But even there, we refused to let the light go out." By early September, Warsaw was a city without a heartbeat. The uprising had been burning for more than a month, and the flames were fading, not because the fight was over, but because there was almost nothing left to burn. Every street was rubble, every wall black with soot. The smell of smoke and death hung in the air like a fog that would never lift. And still, they waited. Across the Vistula, on the eastern bank, stood the Red Army. The soldiers of the Soviet Union watched as the city burned. The people of Warsaw looked to them every day, believing, praying, begging. They flashed lights at night, sent radio messages, waved flags from rooftops. "Help us," they said. "Please." But the Soviets did not move. The official line said they were regrouping. The truth was far darker. Politics had turned the river into a wall. "We could see them," one survivor said. "They were so close we could almost hear their engines." But they did not cross. The city was dying within sight of salvation. Food was gone. Water was poison, pulled from wells filled with ash and corpses. People boiled wallpaper for glue, ate anything that could be chewed. Children starved in cellars while their parents prayed for the shelling to end. Doctors cut bandages from old curtains. Priests gave their last blessings in whispers. Even the pigeons were gone. By now, the uprising wasn't a fight. It was a heartbeat refusing to stop. A young fighter wrote in his final note, "We no longer hope to win. We only hope someone remembers we tried." As German forces pushed deeper, block by block, the remaining defenders retreated underground. Sewers became highways of the damned. Pitch-black tunnels where men crawled through filth and corpses just to reach another neighborhood still standing. Some drowned, some suffocated. Some emerged only to find the places they were trying to save already gone. Above them, the city was silent, except for the sound of falling buildings. "We fought for every meter," said one commander. Then there were no meters left to fight for. By the third week of September, even the radio fell silent. The transmitters had been destroyed, the operators killed. The last broadcast from Warsaw was a woman's voice, calm but broken. "We are waiting for you, but we cannot wait much longer." Then, static. After that, nothing. The city that once sang now whispered only through fire. When the end came, it came not as defeat, but as exhaustion. Commanders argued whether to surrender or die in the ruins. Many couldn't decide. Some shot themselves rather than face capture. The rest simply put down their weapons and sat in the dark, listening to the city crumble above them. "We had no more strength," one nurse said. "Not to fight, not to cry." On October the 2nd, 1944, the uprising officially ended. Warsaw, the city that fought alone, fell in silence. When the survivors were marched out, they turned one last time to see their city. It was gone. No buildings, no streets, no color. Only smoke and the smell of dust. One fighter whispered, "We are leaving the ashes of freedom." When the last gun fell silent, Warsaw was no longer a city. It was a desert of ruins, bricks, ashes, broken glass, and silence. The uprising had ended, but the destruction had only just begun. For Hitler, the fall of Warsaw wasn't enough. He ordered the city to be erased, level it to the ground. And the order was carried out with machine-like precision. German engineers and demolition squads moved through the empty streets. Building by building, they set charges. They burned libraries, museums, hospitals, churches, anything that still stood. Entire neighborhoods disappeared in clouds of dust and smoke. Even the royal castle, the heart of Polish history, was blown up. Room by room, statues, paintings, archives, everything reduced to rubble. "They killed our city," a survivor said, "and then they killed its memory." By the time they were done, over 85% of Warsaw was gone. Out of more than 1 million residents, fewer than 1,000 remained hidden in the ruins. The captured fighters and civilians were driven from the city like shadows. Columns of the wounded, barefoot, starving, stumbled through the ashes under armed guard. Behind them, nothing. Many carried only what they could hold in their hands: a photo, a medal, a child's toy. For some, even that was too much. A witness recalled, "We walked through what used to be streets. There was no wind, no birds, only the smell of stone and death." The soldiers who survived the uprising were sent to POW camps, the civilians to concentration camps or forced labor. The city that had fought for freedom had become a graveyard without graves. For weeks after, only the sound of explosions echoed through the ruins as German troops finished their work. They destroyed what could not fight back. They took photos, proud of the emptiness they had made. By December 1944, Warsaw was a ghost. No light, no voices, no life. A Soviet reconnaissance unit that entered the outskirts months later wrote, "We saw a city of stone and silence. Not one building stood whole. It looked like the moon." But even in death, Warsaw refused to vanish. In cellars and ruins hidden under the ashes were bottles and metal boxes filled with letters, poems, photographs, the diaries of those who fought and died. They were found years later, still legible. Their words were simple but stronger than any wall. "If you find this," one note said, "know that we lived. Know that we loved our city." That was their victory. Memory. When the war finally ended in 1945, those who survived came back. They stood in the ruins, trying to find where their homes had been. There were no streets, no signs, only rubble and silence. Some fell to their knees. Others picked up stones and began to rebuild. "We came back to nothing," one woman said, "but it was our nothing." Slowly, brick by brick, Warsaw began to rise again, not from strength, from defiance. Today, Warsaw stands rebuilt, a living city where every street remembers. The scars are still there, but so is the soul. The uprising failed. The city was destroyed. But the people who fought, they won something greater. They proved that even when the world turns its back, and even when hope itself burns away, the human spirit can still stand among the ashes. They wanted to erase us, a survivor once said. But they forgot. Memory is stronger than fire.